It's kind of like putting a jigsaw puzzle together in some ways. I wish that more men would realize that sewing is working with a machine, and you're working with patterns that you cut like you would tin if you were a tinsmith. And instead of welding, you're sewing them together. Uh, it's creative, it's constructive. My name is Jim Haws. I'm a gentleman quilter. I majored in textile arts and interior design at the California College of Arts and Crafts, graduating in 1968, and came to quilting late in my life. I started quilting about 4 years ago and have found it a wonderful, relaxing, meditative, creative endeavor. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, my mother got a sewing machine, and I was fascinated with it. It was a machine that sewed, and it was neat, and she wouldn't let me near it. So after my parents were divorced, I went to live with my grandmother, who also had a sewing machine, and she wouldn't let me near that one either. They were in the process, my grandparents were in the process of building a house next door, and my grandmother stored her sewing machine there. So one afternoon, I quietly went over to this vacant house where her sewing machine was, and I found a shirt pattern, and I found 2 pieces of fabric, and I sewed them together. One was a maroon satin and the other was an old piece of sheeting. I couldn't show anybody that I'd made it, because if I did, my grandparents would know that I had used her sewing machine, so I just carted it around and hidden in my drawer for a long time. But I was always interested in sewing. Finally, when I was about in my 40s, I was walking down the street one day and passed a sewing machine shop, and they were having a sale, and I went in and bought one and started taking a few classes and started making myself shirts and slacks. Our son's daughter, who was about 11 or 12, was doing a project at school, and he called and wanted to know if I would teach her how to do quilting. They were supposed to recreate something, some craft from an earlier time. And I said sure, so I hurried down, bought some books on quilting. I'd never done any quilting, and I thought, well, okay, so I read how to do it, and I got all the pieces assembled, and then about 10 days later, they called and said she had decided to do a PowerPoint presentation, and I had all these pieces, and I thought, well, I might just as well put it together, and I did, and I had such a fun time. And so I've just continued to do it for the last 3.5 years. I think art is communication. Any art talks to people in some form, visually or tactily, but it's communicating something that the artist is wanting someone else to experience. Something that he's experienced or she's experienced, or something that they would like to experience, or comment on something, a political comment, or just any kind of comment. Things that make you feel good. There are all kinds of, like a quilt, for instance, makes you feel good. It keeps you warm, and depending on what the backing is, it can make you very snuggly. I think that's one of the reasons that I like quilting so much, is because it's a practical thing that can be very beautiful. I've always wanted to be an artist. From the time that I was in the 4th grade. I was sitting in the classroom in the 4th grade, and we were drawing, and I was drawing the missions of California, one of them, and I just felt so wonderful that that very day I determined I was going to be an artist and have struggled to be one for nearly 70 years.